Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first 2023 Comprehensive Plan Update Community Outreach event. Thank you for coming this evening. My name is Keith Niven. I am the city's Community Development Director. And we're going to have a short presentation this evening to talk about the process that we're going through to update the city's comprehensive plan. And I have two staff people here that are ready to address you all. So Cheney and Evan, I'm going to hand the mic.
Hi, good evening, and thank you so much for attending tonight's event. If you haven't already, please help yourself to some refreshments and snacks in the back. Those are for you. All right, let's get started. So, Evan.
So welcome. The comprehensive plan, you probably have a general sense of what that is, having been here for a few minutes, walked around to the different stations. It is the centerpiece of our local planning for the built, natural, and social environment in the city. It is a 20-year plan. It identifies the type of city that we want to be 20 years from now in the year 2044. So think about the world in 2044 and where you'll be, and that is the time frame we're planning on with the comp plan update. It ensures that we have the capacity to manage growth in our jobs, households, and our future population, that we can accommodate that growth in the next 20 years. It informs the decisions of elected officials. It also guides staff every day as we do our jobs in following a city code that is adopted and is updated that's consistent with the comprehensive plan. So the comp plan is it's a big deal. It's a very important planning document, and so I'm glad you're all here to provide input and inform the next 20 years of planning for Federal Way. So this chart here, this shows two things. It shows the historical growth since 1990. We became a city in 1990, and it shows population that reflects our adopted growth targets. So this doesn't mean that we will be just under 130,000 people by 2050, but we have to plan as though we are. So our adopted growth targets would reflect that future population that you see there. We just passed 100,000 population in the 2020 census. We're the 9th largest city now in Washington State, and we have to plan for growth of approximately 10,000 people per year over the next 3 decades. So that just puts things in perspective. That's actually consistent, though, with the growth that we've seen over the last 3 decades per decade. So we are planning more specifically for accommodating 11,000 new households and 20,000 new jobs over the next 20 years. Those are our adopted jobs and housing targets. Doesn't mean that we will actually have those numbers, but we have to plan for those specific numbers. Those are targets that are adopted at the county level by King County. In this go-around, we have of our comp plan update, we have an increased focus on several different areas. A big one, as you saw at the front, talking to Cheney and to Keith, is our downtown. And we have a lot of capacity for our future growth and accommodating these targets in our downtown, and we want to establish a clearer and stronger downtown identity, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout all chapters of our comprehensive plan. We're a very diverse city, and our comprehensive plan should reflect the diversity of our city, so that all feel welcome here and are welcome here, and have a say in what the city looks like in 20 years. Transit-oriented development, we want to ensure that growth is accessible to transit and is near transit, particularly given that we have light rail coming to Federal Way in the not too distant future, as well as citywide mobility, not just by automobiles, but by all modes of travel. So that's auto, bike, pedestrian, and walking. Which is a pedestrian, and transit as well. And so citywide mobility. And then lastly, an area of emphasis is arts, culture, and historic preservation, which is the station that I'm blocking here, to ensure that we are supporting local art and are preserving our history in the way that we want to preserve it. So next we'll go to Cheney.
So it's, as Evan covered, it's really important that we're planning for the future because we live in a really popular region. A lot of people move to Seattle and other parts of the Puget Sound, and we are growing and going to continue to grow. But it's important that this growth is molded and shaped by the desires of the community. So community engagement and events like this and hearing from what the existing community wants out of the future is really important. We're not trying to plan for the future in a vacuum, but include as many voices as possible so that a rising tide lifts all boats, and that as the community grows and more people call Federal Way home, those that call Federal Way home now are enjoying that growth and benefiting from it as well. We've done a number of things over the last 2 years, and we have over a year and a half left of this work to update the comprehensive plan. And again, thank you for joining us tonight, and I hope you'll continue being involved with this process so that we can be sure to capture the ideas, thoughts, and desires you have for what you want Federal Way to be known for and to be by 2044. I guess before we dive too deep, I want to acknowledge that the city is actually on the ancestral lands of the coastal Salish people, and to acknowledge that this land is now the city of Federal Way, but was originally the ancestral lands. And here are some photos of how Federal Way what we now know as the boundaries of Federal Way has changed. You can see that in the 1936, this aerial photo, well, maybe you can see it's black and white and kind of grainy, but it was really rural in nature. In 1990, just 33 years ago now, the city incorporated, and that's the first comprehensive planning map for the city. And you can see the city hasn't changed a whole lot since incorporation. There's been a number of annexations where the city has grown, but not substantially. There's some other areas surrounding Federal Way that remain unincorporated, King County, that are potential annexation areas. We keep that in mind and consider that as we plan for the future. But you can see the far map on the left is of those areas that have actually been incorporated into the city limits. Something to acknowledge is that while Federal Way has grown over the last 33 years since incorporating, not only have we increased in population, we have diversified a lot. So comparing the left graph to the right, at the time that the city of Federal Way incorporated, Federal Way was less diverse than the county as a whole, and now you can see that Federal Way exceeds King County's, I don't want to say exceeds diversity, but is more racially and ethnically diverse than King County, with our population over 100,000 people, and according to the Federal Way Public Schools, over 107 languages are spoken in Federal Way. A picture on the left there is a number of the flags of the countries of origin. So not only is Federal Way rich in the diversity of race, ethnicity, but also country of origin. So we have a lot of immigrant status here as well, or immigrants that have chose to call Federal Way home as well. And I want to just review the timeline. I kind of mentioned this earlier. We've been working on updating the comprehensive plan starting in 2021, where we launched EngageFW. That's the city's first public participation platform. If you haven't checked it out yet, I hope you scan a QR code by the end of the night and create an account so you can receive updates on how we are continuing to plan for this process. But something that we've worked a lot over the last year, and as one of my slides earlier showed photos of going to community events and asking questions about bigger picture things, the vision for the future. So on that table over there, we have the new draft vision statement. I hope you take a moment to take a look at it and weigh in if this is generally the right direction. Is the city going in the right path that you think for the future? Or should we add, or something missing? But here I will now actually go through that vision statement. So in 2044, Federal Way leads South King County as a livable, vibrant, and well-connected community. A reimagined city center and defined downtown is the heart of the city and a source of pride. The natural environment thrives. Businesses prosper. Abundant housing options meet the diverse needs. And the community is socially engaged and feels a sense of belonging. Getting around is safe, getting around is convenient and safe. The community embraces its commitment to unlocking untapped potential. What's really important behind this vision statement is it's serving as a North Star for the city as we update each of these chapters. So Evan went over how this comprehensive plan is a blueprint for planning for the future. While there's a lot of topics that go into and a lot of areas that go into planning a city, a lot of them overlap, but something that should remain consistent is that as we are thinking about the goals and policies and the actions the city takes to plan for the future, that we have this vision in mind, that we are putting forward these guiding principles that go towards realizing that vision for Federal Way. And these are all the chapters that are included. I think there are 17. So land use. Land use is a really important component to the comprehensive plan. It is foundational to how a city functions, how a city exists. For example, the land use chapter and the land use it contains the comprehensive plan map designations, and that determines what uses, the intensity, the density, and where they're allowed. So you might see a zoning map over there in the land use table or a comprehensive map. The different colors indicate the different uses between housing, mixed use, industrial, whereas the zoning map takes that foundation a step further and defines what types of uses and what typology and density is allowed. And there's one more thing I wanted to mention. Centers is a new chapter to the city's comprehensive plan. This didn't currently exist, but we have a city center chapter that focuses on that downtown area. But this chapter is going to capture another area, which I'll get into shortly, which is the South Station sub-area plan. The goal here is that Federal Way is not a homogeneous neighborhood. It's not, all neighborhoods aren't exactly the same, and with the investment in high-capacity transit, some neighborhoods need to function a little different. And the idea is that we can create centers or these hubs of higher opportunities for employment and higher density housing, and create more districts and areas that optimize land use near transit. That's just more of an efficient option and a smart, sustainable growth path. And like I mentioned, a new chapter. And so, like I mentioned, we have a city center chapter, and the goal with this update to this plan is to further the vision of creating a downtown through more specific implementing actions and really creating a place that people want to be, whether they live there, work there, or just frequent the area, because there should be a lot going on. There access to arts and culture and entertainment, a place to go shopping, and a safe place to stroll and walk. Something that is a part of this chapter is directing how to catalyze redevelopment. The light rail is the Federal Way link extension is planned to start operating in 2025. But if you look around, there's not a lot of development that seems compatible or complementary to access to high capacity transit. So the city wants to help catalyze that redevelopment and set the bar for future growth. And that's through the redevelopment of city-owned property. Another key component to thinking about our downtown is how do we make it a place people want to be, and that's through promoting and prioritizing walkability and creating a space that pedestrians and bicyclists and people pushing strollers want to be outside and enjoy instead of a car-centric or auto-dominated area in the city. There's a lot of ways in which our built environment shapes our behavior, and through adjustments in our downtown, we hope to create an area that is community-focused, that brings people together, and is a centerpiece to the city. Another opportunity for thinking about areas that can serve as a community gathering place where people work, live, and play, I guess is the saying, is around a future light rail station, the Tacoma Dome Link extension. So this is farther in the future. This station isn't proposed to be operating until 2035. That's just a recent delay. But the idea here is that the city wants to be looking at this area of the city now, to be planning ahead of that investment, to be promoting the compatible growth for transit to create that neighborhood before the station opens, and maybe be a little more ahead of the train, if you will. And this sub-area plan is basically a smaller, like a mini comp plan. It discusses mobility and housing and economic development, open space, parks and recs, a lot of things that go into creating a neighborhood, and basically it's a smaller long-range planning document. Housing is essential to living. Housing is a necessary component to a lifestyle, and like many Puget Sound cities, Federal Way has experienced increase in housing prices that has not kept up with the increase in incomes. So housing is becoming less affordable for many households, many neighborhoods, many people. And something that we discovered or further studied as part of the Housing Action Plan in 2021 is that even the rate of the housing developed here isn't keeping up with the people moving here. So there's a really low vacancy rate, which means that there's not a lot of options. So if you're wanting to downsize, or if you're wanting to buy a bigger house or move, there's just not a lot of variety in housing. There's not the spectrum of housing in Federal Way is heavy on the both ends, whether it's maybe multifamily or single family, where a typology in between might serve different households, and that's a missing element. And so this chapter focuses on promoting a spectrum of housing types where it's appropriate to serve the diverse housing needs of the community. All right, back to Evan.
So transportation, the way people move around Federal Way in any city is a critical factor in our quality of life. That's whether we're just moving around the city or trying to connect to an area outside of the city. The transportation chapter plans for all modes of travel, so driving, walking, biking, and connections to transit. Generally, people, regardless of what mode of travel they're choosing, want to get where they're going as quickly and inexpensively as possible. But as our traffic staff can share, we have staff from Public Works Traffic Division. You can chat with them after this presentation. They can probably speak to how expensive both building and maintaining our transportation infrastructure is. So the transportation chapter, it identifies projects that are going to be needed to support and show the capacity to support the growth that we expect over the next 20 years. All of those new houses, all of those new jobs, all those new people who are going to be using our transportation infrastructure, and also the process for prioritizing and selecting those projects. So all of that is laid out in the transportation and mobility chapter. And that's one key thing in this update right now in our comp plan. It's the transportation chapter. Now it's transportation and mobility, and an increased area focused is mobility through all modes of travel. Parks and recreation. So we currently have a Parks, Rec, and Open Space plan by the city, and it was developed with extensive public outreach in 2019 by our Parks Department staff who are here over by the Park Station. Jason Gerwin and John Hutton is here if you want to talk about parks. And so that plan is currently being implemented. We don't currently have a comprehensive plan chapter focused on parks and recreation. And the benefit of that is ensuring that our parks planning is specifically consistent with all of the other chapters and aspects of the built and natural environment around the room, and that it reflects our most updated adopted growth targets. So we are, through this process, refreshing the PROS plan, Parks, Rec, and Open Space plan, and then ensuring that it is consistent with the new chapter of our comp plan, which is the Parks and Rec chapter of the comprehensive plan. So, and then sort of bridging both of these topics, and that's why they're between the two topics, is we have a Southwest King County regional trail plan that's being developed. And this is to identify, we already have a lot of bits and pieces of trails in Federal Way, as well as future trails in our comprehensive plan. So it's looking at our current network and how can we bridge the gap and also connect to areas outside of Federal Way to better connect people to transit to connect people to destinations outside the city, to parks, and to anywhere that they want to go. And so Jason Kennedy from the Public Works Department is here, and you can weigh in on this plan. And this is being developed now. There's a steering committee that's been convened, and it will be completed by the end of this year. So you can talk more about how to weigh in on that after this. So natural environment, we have a lot of natural environmental assets in the city of Federal Way. We have an extensive shoreline. We have a lot of tree cover in a pretty big swath of the city, not all of the city. There are certain areas where there's issues of tree equity for sure. We have hundreds of wetlands. We have a lot of streams, the High Lobos Waterway. We have a lot of natural assets, and we have to protect those through our comprehensive plan. And the natural environment chapter lays out goals and policies of how to do that. Sometimes having to balance that with goals and policies of other chapters like our housing chapter and our transportation chapter, because there's always a balancing act in the comp plan. But how we protect our environmental critical areas and other aspects of the natural environment is addressed in that chapter. Shorelines, we have a dedicated chapter on shorelines in our comp plan, and this largely reflects the requirements of the state through the Shoreline Management Act. Within 200 feet of state designated shorelines, there are extra protections in place. So like if we get development proposals within 200 feet of the water along the Puget Sound shoreline, as well as around Steel Lake and North Lake, those are shoreline designated areas as it reflected in our comp plan and under the state law. And so we are also refreshing the Shoreline Master Program in this comp plan update. We have a new chapter in our comp plan on climate change and resiliency. So we are doing a refresh of our 2019 greenhouse gas emissions inventory, which you can look at the specifics on over on the wall here. We are also looking at goals and policies to both reduce the city's greenhouse gas emissions and to become more resilient to not just climate change hazards, but to all hazards. And so we have an emergency management director here, Kevin Pelly, who's working on a hazard mitigation plan for the city. So we'll ensure that the comp plan, particularly this chapter, is consistent and reflects our new hazard mitigation plan so we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, become more resilient to hazards, and maybe there's some co-benefits that we can identify too. So feel free, we have an active survey on our EngageFW.com website. You can also weigh in over here. We're trying to get a temperature check from the community on different issues around climate change. So please weigh in. And then capital facilities, we have a capital facilities chapter. About half of it lays out capital facility plans for city-managed capital facilities, and then also coordination with private and other entities for non-city managed capital facilities. And these are things that we often take for granted in our day-to-day life, but they're basic components and critical components of our modern civilized world that we wouldn't be able to get by without. That includes how we manage stormwater, how the provision of parks, the provision of transportation infrastructure, community buildings like the one that we're in right now, and then non-city managed ones. We have water and sewer districts so we have to ensure through our capital facilities plan that we have the capacity in water and sewer to support the growth that we expect over the next 20 years. Coordination with the school district as far as school facilities, as well as South King Fire and Rescue to provide for any fire facilities in the city. So all of that is addressed in our capital facilities chapter, and you can visit the various folks from our Public Works Department, and Brian Asbury from Lake Haven Water and Sewer District is also present in the back if you have questions about that. And then relatedly, we have a dedicated chapter on utilities. It's really focused on private utilities because most of our utilities are water and sewer, electric and natural gas, telecommunications, internet, TV, phone, and solid waste. A lot of that is really about coordinating with entities outside the city and how we can better do that. So that's the private utilities and capital facilities chapters. So.
Economic development remains or is also a really essential piece to the health of a community. Not only does the economic prospects of a community help generate tax revenue that runs the city, but it also is essential to a thriving community. A local and a strong local economy is important in many areas. This chapter addresses these 6 components to serving the local economy, being business retention and expansion, business attraction, new business creation, placemaking, tourism, and workforce development. This is a new chapter to the city's comprehensive plan. This is, and something we haven't gone over yet is that some of these chapters are requirements by the state. You know, in 1995, the state passed the Growth Management Act. 1990, passed the Growth Management Act that basically says, okay, cities, you need to be planning in a smart way, a sustainable way. We have to preserve our open spaces and our agricultural lands. And we need to be taking care of the state. And they determined a number of chapters to the comprehensive plan that we need to be planning for. Arts, culture, and historic preservation isn't one of those. But from the direction of the council and from the community, it was determined as an essential piece to be planning for Federal Way's future. Not only because of the rich diversity I covered earlier, but also the history and the ways in which art, culture, and historic preservation, or these historic artifacts or landmarks, have as a role in bringing people together and building community identity, and how that adds or builds the authentic story of Federal Way. So while not required, it's a really important chapter, and I've really enjoyed working on this. And I will read this. Planning for this chapter is intended to plan for a more inclusive future, and through the goals and policies that remember and honor the past, bring people together, and, like I said, promote a community's character. And this is the final chapter. The community services chapter will describe how the city's efforts in planning, funding, and coordinating services contribute to achieving a more socially stable and equitable community. The topics included in this chapter include access to food and shelter, safe communities, aging in place, youth services, coordination of services, and I also believe there's workforce development as well. But this is also a non-required chapter, but another area in which is an opportunity for the different departments in the city to be planning in the same document and address ways to coordinate our efforts, and this is an area to do so. The implementation. So this comprehensive plan, we're going to need to adopt it by, December of 2024. And the implementation is going to be a piece of that. Each of these chapters will have areas, actions, programming that are identified that will be implementing actions to achieve what some of these goals and policies are pointing towards. And some of that can look at changing our development regulations, the codes that we use during development review, whether it's regarding housing or different types of uses or different zones. And then that zoning map is, are we changing where some of these zones are? For example, the South Station subarea plan, that's an area where that station is planned for that doesn't allow for housing. Currently, it's our commercial enterprise zone. So implementing this comprehensive plan and adopting this South Station subarea plan would say, well, there might be areas here that should be more compatible with transit-oriented development, and a change in that zoning is something that you might see as an implementing action. As well as this, the implementing actions include our building the different departments' work plans on what staff is working on, and should guide how the city's, some city decisions and staff decisions as they come up. And just a review of where we are. We've been working on this for a couple years now, but we're about at a midpoint. And we'll continue to be hosting pop-up events around the community this summer. And we'll be wrapping up by the end of 2024. So there's still plenty of time to get involved and make your voice heard on what's important for you as the city plans for the future. You can stay involved by visiting EngageFW.com. There's a QR codes in some of the tables around, and that's the city's public participation platform. If you create an account, you can then receive newsletters on news surveys and updated or planning events and things to attend. But there's other ways as well. Oh, here you go. Here's the QR code. The adoption process is long and lengthy. Every chapter will be briefed with the Planning Commission. So every goal and policy that we're proposing to amend or proposing as new will be read aloud to our Planning Commission, and they meet on the first and third Wednesday of every month at City Hall at 6 p.m. And the community is always welcome. There's time for public comment, and so over the next year and a half, more chapters as they're ready will be taken and presented to the Planning Commission. On the second Monday of each month, we have comprehensive plan ad hoc meetings, which is a public meeting where we have a steering committee that helps answer questions and is a good sounding board as we continue to work on the comprehensive plan, and as well as quarterly LUTC meetings. LUTC is the Land Use and Transportation Committee, so we'll go there. The next is going to be in June, the first Monday of the month at 5 p.m., also at City Hall. That, I believe, is you can attend or view on YouTube. But we'll give quarterly updates to keep our council members aware and informed of how the development of the comprehensive plan is going. And then you can always stay involved and share what you're thinking by reaching out to us directly. Every type of input is taken into consideration, whether it's written or heard, and we are taking what we're hearing and using it to fill the gaps as we work on planning for the future. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. Any questions?
And one quick hot off the presses update. The Planning Commission is now going to start meeting at 5 o'clock starting April 5th. So which is nice, a little bit earlier. People can attend at 5. So.
Okay, wow, 5 p.m. And actually, instead of doing a Q&A, we were thinking that if there are certain topics that you're most interested in, we'll have our staff go back to their stations, and you can talk with them directly about those. And we mentioned we have a lot. This was a team effort here tonight between a lot of the city departments to bring you the most accurate information and talk to you about what is currently in the works and as the plan progresses.
Thank you. There is a suggestion table, the blue canister by the door. So again, staff are going to be standing by their topical tables. And if you would like to continue to engage with staff this evening, please do. Otherwise, thank you for coming this evening. Please check out EngageFW, and we're going to be out at community events all year long. So thank you.